the hidden ballet training that shaped Freddie Mercury's iconic stage moves. Something was different about Freddie Mercury's stage presence. Something that separated him from every other rock star who ever lived. While other musicians stumbled awkwardly across stages, Freddie moved like liquid poetry. Every gesture, every turn, every dramatic pose. It wasn't natural talent. It was training, secret training. Training that began in a forgotten dance studio in New York City, 1974. The Juilliard School of Music stands like a temple to artistic excellence on Manhattan's Upper West Side. Its halls have witnessed the birth of countless legends. But in the winter of 1974, those same halls harbored a secret that would reshape rock history forever. A secret about a young man with terrible teeth and impossible dreams. A secret about classical ballet training that was never supposed to exist. A secret that explains why Freddie Mercury moved like no one else. Room 304, third floor. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m., before the school officially opened, before students arrived, before anyone would notice. That's where it happened. That's where rock and roll learned to dance. But this story begins 3 months earlier, in a cramped apartment in Queens, where a struggling musician named Farrokh Bulsara was about to make a decision that would change everything. The winter of 1973 was brutal in New York City. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. The kind of poverty that makes you question every dream you've ever had. But sometimes, the most impossible dreams are the ones worth fighting for. November 1973, Queens, New York. The radiator clanged like a broken drum kit. Snow pressed against the grimy windows of the fourth-floor walk-up. Inside, a thin young man with oversized front teeth sat cross-legged on a mattress, watching Swan Lake on a black-and-white television. His name was Farrokh Bulsara. Soon, the world would know him as Freddie Mercury. But that night, he was just another immigrant with impossible dreams. The apartment was barely bigger than a closet. One room, shared with 2 other musicians who were always behind on rent. The heat worked sporadically. The cockroaches were more reliable than the electricity. The American dream felt more like an American nightmare. But when the ballet began on that fuzzy screen, something awakened. The New York City Ballet was performing at Lincoln Center, and PBS was broadcasting highlights. Through the static and the poor reception, magic poured into that tiny room. "Look at them move," Farrokh whispered to his roommate, Jimmy, a bass player from Boston. "Look at the control, the precision." Jimmy glanced up from his guitar, where he was picking out a half-hearted version of Stairway to Heaven. "It's just dancing, man. Fancy dancing for rich people." But Farrokh saw something else. He saw power, grace, command of space and time. He saw what he wanted to become. The prima ballerina moved across the stage like she owned not just the theater, but the entire world. Every movement deliberate. Every gesture filled with meaning. When she raised her arms, the universe stopped to watch. When she leaped, gravity became optional. That's when the idea struck him. What if rock and roll could move like that? What if a singer could command a stage the way these dancers commanded theirs? Farrokh had been performing in small clubs around the city for months. Terrible venues with sticky floors and audiences that barely looked up from their drinks. He'd watch other musicians, even successful ones, and notice how they stood like statues behind microphone stands. How they awkwardly shuffled from side to side. How they seemed afraid of their own bodies. Rock music was powerful, but rock performers were prisoners of their own limitations. The next morning, Farrokh walked through the freezing streets of Manhattan, past the hot dog vendors steaming in the early dawn, past the taxis already honking their urban symphony, past the towering buildings that seemed to mock his small-town dreams. He had $47 in his pocket, and a plan that everyone would call insane. The plan was simple in its audacity: learn ballet, not to become a dancer, but to become something else entirely. Something the music world had never seen: a rock star who moved like a god. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. Her name was Madame Petrova. Russian, stern, unforgiving, and she was about to become Freddie Mercury's greatest secret. The Lincoln Center area buzzed with artistic energy, even in the dead of winter. Street musicians on every corner, their fingers too cold to play properly. Dancers hurrying between studios with their hair pulled back and dreams visible in their determined strides. Farouk found the small studio tucked between a delicatessen and a dry cleaner on West 67th Street. The sign was modest, almost invisible: Petrova Classical Ballet, Private Instruction. Inside, mirrors covered every wall. Bars lined the room like prison bars. And in the center, a woman who looked like she could stop time with a glance. Madame Irina Petrova was 63 years old, former principal dancer with the Bolshoi Ballet. She had fled Moscow in 1956 with nothing but her technique, her iron will, and stories she would never tell. She was not impressed by rock musicians. "You want to learn ballet?" Her accent was thick as winter honey, each word carefully chosen and perfectly pronounced. "You? With those teeth and that hair?" Farouk stood straighter. His hair was indeed wild, a mass of dark curls that seemed to have their own agenda. His clothes were second-hand and threadbare. His teeth protruded in a way that made him self-conscious about smiling. But his eyes burned with something she recognized. Hunger. Desperate, beautiful hunger. "I want to learn to move," he said. "To command a stage like those dancers command theirs." She studied him for a long moment. In Russia, she had seen many students. The talented ones, the dedicated ones, the ones who would never make it but refused to quit. This young man was different. This young man was dangerous. "Ballet is not for rock and roll," she said finally. "Ballet is discipline, suffering, years of pain for moments of perfection." "I understand pain," Farouk replied. "I've been poor. I've been rejected. I've performed for audiences that didn't care if I lived or died." Something in his voice made her pause. Something that reminded her of herself decades ago, when she was young and desperate and willing to sacrifice everything for art. "Why ballet?" she asked. "Why not just move around on stage like the others?" Farouk approached one of the mirrors. He could see himself reflected infinitely. 1,000 versions of a young man with a dream too big for his circumstances. "Because I don't want to be like the others," he said. "I want to be impossible to ignore. I want to move in ways that make people forget how to breathe." Madame Petrova smiled for the first time in months. She had found her greatest challenge. "Very well," she said, "but we do this my way. Classical technique, Russian method. And you tell no one, not your friends, not your bandmates. This stays between us." "Why the secrecy?" Her expression darkened. "Because the world is not ready for what we are about to create." January 1974, 6 a.m., Petrova's studio. Pain has its own language, and Farouk was learning to speak it fluently. The first lesson lasted 3 hours and nearly killed him. Ballet, he discovered, was not dancing. Ballet was war against your own body's limitations. "First position," Madame Petrova commanded, her voice cutting through the dawn silence like a blade. "Heels together, toes out, shoulders down. Chin up. Pretend there is a string pulling you toward heaven." Farrokh tried to comply. His body rebelled. His legs shook. His back screamed. His feet, cramped into borrowed ballet shoes, felt like they were on fire. "Terrible," Petrova observed with clinical detachment. "Your posture is like a question mark. Your turnout is non-existent. Your arms, what are you doing with your arms?" "I don't know," Farrokh gasped. "Exactly. You know nothing." "This is good. We start from nothing." Week after week, they met in secret. While the rest of New York slept, Farrokh learned the fundamental positions. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Each one a precise geometry of muscle and bone. His body was transforming, but not in ways anyone could see. The changes were subtle at first. Better posture when he walked down the street. More awareness of his limbs when he performed at the small clubs. A growing sense that his body was an instrument he was finally learning to play. "You are beginning to understand," Petrova told him after 6 weeks of training. "Ballet is not about the steps. Ballet is about inhabiting space like you own it." That lesson would change everything. But the real breakthrough came on a snowy February morning when Petrova introduced him to something called porte de bras, the movement of the arms. "In ballet," she explained, "the arms tell the story. Watch." She demonstrated a simple sequence. Her arms rose from her sides, curved overhead, then swept down in a gesture so beautiful and complete that Farrokh felt something break open in his chest. "Now you try." Farrokh raised his arms, copying her movement. It felt awkward, unnatural. "No," Petrova said sharply. "You are thinking with your brain. Think with your heart. What story are your arms telling?" He tried again. This time something was different. His arms moved not just through space, but through emotion. Rising like hope, sweeping like wind, falling like rain. "Better," Petrova nodded. "Much better." But the secret was taking its toll. Farrokh's roommates noticed he was leaving early and returning exhausted. His bandmates commented on his improved posture, but couldn't figure out why. The lies were getting harder to maintain. And then, everything almost fell apart. One morning in March, Jimmy followed him. Curious about Farrokh's mysterious early morning appointments, the bass player trailed him through the streets of Manhattan to the dance studio. Through the window, Jimmy saw everything. His rock musician roommate, in ballet shoes, learning classical dance. That evening, Jimmy confronted him. "What the hell was that, man? Ballet? Are you insane?" Farrokh's secret was out, and his entire future hung in the balance. Some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and some are too dangerous to reveal. Jimmy's discovery threatened everything. Within hours, the other musicians in their circle knew. By the end of the week, half the downtown music scene was talking about the rock singer who thought he was a ballerina. The ridicule was merciless. "Hey, Farrokh," called out Pete, a guitarist from a competing band, at a club on the Lower East Side. "Show us some of those fancy dance moves." The laughter was like acid. It burned through his confidence, his dreams, his sense of self. For the first time since starting the training, Farrokh considered quitting. Madame Petrova had other ideas. "You want to stop?" she asked during their next lesson. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were fierce. "Because some small-minded people cannot understand what we are doing?" "They think I'm a joke," Farrokh said, slumping against the mirror. "Maybe they're right." Petrova walked over and grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "I have seen many students. Some had natural talent. Some had dedication. But you have something else." "What?" "Vision. You see what others cannot see. You dream what others cannot dream." She moved to the center of the studio. "When I was young in Moscow, the other dancers laughed at me too. Too tall, they said. Too dramatic. Too much. Her voice grew distant, remembering. But I knew something they did not know. I knew that being too much is better than being not enough. She executed a perfect pirouette, her body spinning like a prayer made visible. They stopped laughing when I became principal dancer. They will stop laughing at you, too. But the damage was spreading. Word of Farouk's ballet training reached the ears of club owners and music promoters. Bookings began to dry up. Bandmates started avoiding him. The already fragile ecosystem of his musical career was collapsing. That's when Petrova made an extraordinary offer. "There is someone you need to meet," she said one morning in April. "Someone who will understand what we are trying to accomplish." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But this meeting will change everything. Once you take this step, there is no going back." The meeting was arranged for the following week, Lincoln Center, after hours. In the very theater where Farouk had first seen the ballet that changed his life. What happened in that empty theater would either destroy his dreams forever or transform him into something the world had never seen. The man waiting for them was tall, elegant, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through time itself. His name was Jerome Robbins, legendary choreographer, creator of West Side Story, master of movement, who had shaped Broadway and ballet for decades. "So," Robbins said, studying Farouk in the dim theater lighting, "you're the rock singer who thinks he can dance." The tone was not encouraging. "Show me what you've learned," Robbins commanded. This was the test. Everything depended on the next 5 minutes. The Lincoln Center Theater was empty, except for 3 people. But it felt like the entire world was watching. Farouk stood on the stage where legends had performed. The ghost light cast long shadows across the wooden floor. In the darkness beyond, he could sense the presence of every great performer who had ever stood in this spot. This was his moment, his only chance to prove that his impossible dream was possible. "Begin," Jerome Robbins said simply. Farouk started with the basic positions Petrova had drilled into him. First, second, third. His body moved with the precision of months of painful practice. But it was more than technique now. It was poetry. He flowed into the Porte de Bras sequence that had been his breakthrough. His arms told stories. Stories of struggle, of dreams, of a young immigrant who refused to accept limitations. Then something magical happened. Without thinking, without planning, Farouk began to move in ways that had never been taught in any ballet class. He took the classical technique and bent it, twisted it, made it his own. He invented rock ballet. His movements were powerful like Elvis, precise like Nureyev, dramatic like something that had never existed before. Robbins watched in stunned silence. Petrova smiled with the satisfaction of a master who had created something unprecedented. When Farouk finished, the theater was absolutely quiet. He stood in the center of the stage, breathing hard, waiting for judgment. "Extraordinary," Robbins whispered. "This changes everything." Robbins walked onto the stage, circling Farouk like a scientist studying a new species. "What you just did, it shouldn't work. Classical ballet and rock and roll should not be compatible. But somehow, you made it work." "More than work," Petrova added. "He made it transcendent." Robbins nodded slowly. "I have a proposition. There's a small venue in Soho, underground, experimental. Artists, dancers, musicians who are pushing boundaries." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They need to see this. They need to see what's possible." The venue was called the Sanctuary, a converted warehouse where the avant-garde came to witness birth of new art forms. The audience would be small, but influential. Critics, artists, people who could change careers with a word. "One performance," Robbins said. "One chance to show the world what you've become. Are you ready?" Farouk looked out into the empty theater seats. "Soon," Those seats would be filled with people who had never seen anything like what he was about to show them. "I'm ready," he said. But he had no idea how ready the world was for him. May 15th, 1974. The Sanctuary, Soho. The night everything changed. The warehouse was packed. Artists, musicians, critics, dancers, people who thought they had seen everything the human body could do on a stage. They were about to discover they were wrong. Backstage, Farouk prepared for the most important performance of his life. He wore simple black clothes. No costume, no gimmicks, just him and everything Petrova had taught him. "Remember," she whispered as he prepared to go on, "you are not performing ballet. You are not performing rock and roll. You are performing something entirely new." The lights dimmed, the small crowd quieted. In the darkness, a single spotlight found Farouk on the small stage, and then he began to move. What happened next defied description. It was classical ballet. It was rock and roll rebellion. It was something that had never existed before and would never exist again in quite the same way. He moved like lightning captured in human form. Every gesture was precise but powerful. Every turn was technically perfect but emotionally raw. He commanded the stage like a king commanding his kingdom. The audience was transfixed. When he finished, the silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause that went on for 10 minutes. Jerome Robbins had tears in his eyes. "You've done it," he told Farouk afterward. "You've created something completely new." But the real validation came from an unexpected source. In the audience that night was a young music journalist named Cameron Crowe, who would later write, "I witnessed the birth of a new species of performer, someone who moved like they had been touched by lightning." Word spread quickly through the underground. The rock singer who danced like a god. Within weeks, Farouk was getting calls from record labels. Not for his voice, though that was powerful. Not for his songs, though they were memorable. For his movement. For the way he transformed every stage into a universe he controlled absolutely. The secret training with Madame Petrova continued for 2 more years, refining, perfecting, developing the movement vocabulary that would eventually hypnotize audiences at Wembley Stadium and Madison Square Garden. But the foundation was already there, built in secret, forged in a forgotten studio, created by a Russian ballet master and an immigrant with impossible dreams. Years later, when Freddie Mercury commanded the stage at Live Aid, when his performance was called the greatest rock performance in history, few people knew the truth. They were watching 25 years of classical ballet training. Disguised as rock and roll, Madame Petrova watched from her small apartment in Queens. She was 78 years old then, but her eyes still burned with the fire of someone who had seen their greatest creation come to life. "I told you," she whispered to her television screen, as Freddie commanded 72,000 people with nothing but his presence. "I told you they would stop laughing." Today, aspiring performers study Freddie Mercury's stage presence. They analyze his movements. They try to copy his gestures. But they don't know the secret. They don't know about the 6 a.m. lessons, the Russian ballet master, the months of pain and transformation. They don't know that rock and roll's greatest performer was also one of its most classically trained. Some secrets are meant to be kept. Others are meant to be discovered, decades later, by those who understand that greatness is never accidental. Freddie Mercury didn't just move like magic. He moved with technique, with precision, with the discipline of a ballet master and the soul of a rock god. And somewhere in Queens, an old Russian woman smiled, knowing she had helped create something impossible, something that would outlive them all.